Hello and welcome to the show. Now there are a variety of Hoonigan cars on Forza 7, all that have their own sort of purpose. If you like cars, such as this twerk stallion, were designed to go drifting, and even I am vaguely capable of getting this car sideways. There are some interesting vehicles, things like the Gasser, for example. The Bel Air, designed as a drag car. You certainly don't see Gassers in that many games, and then of course you have the Hoonicorn itself. But the most important question of all is, will these particular selection of vehicles be able to roll? So naturally, that is what I wanted to put to the test. We start with the Bel Air Gasser. Theoretically, a very high centre of mass should help this, with the hugely raised up front end of this vehicle. Just in general, yeah, a high centre of mass should be good for helping the vehicle roll over. But let's not forget, another important component of being able to roll cars here on Forza 7 is related to grip. The vehicles need to have a lot of grip, and they need to be able to turn with a lot of accuracy and hit the curb in a very precise manner, which something like the Gasser is going to struggle with. It is not the best handling vehicle, not by a long shot, so I didn't really know what we were going to see from it. The first attempt did not look massively promising, which was a little bit of a concern, let's be honest. Also, didn't really know how the suspension would act on this vehicle. It is very, very soft. However, running back the other way, and then, yeah, we had no issues with the Bel Air tumbling over. While the suspension is relatively soft, the suspension does kind of absorb quite a lot of the shock. If you hit the curb a little bit wrong, then yeah, the suspension will do what the suspension is supposed to do. But if you can clip it just right, you don't have to be going very fast at all, and that's good news for the Gasser, because then you can position it where you want it to, even though the steering isn't great. And sure enough, it is going to go for a tumble. Well, that time it was going to skid along on its side, but yeah. Perhaps not the biggest surprise, let's face it, of the Hoonigan cars you would expect. I mean, that one there just didn't really do anything on the curb. Of the Hoonigan cars, yeah, wasn't particularly surprised to see the Gasser being fond of falling over. I tried to launch it over by taking the faster route. Actually, impressive amount of time it was getting onto two wheels. I think if the corner was a little different, it would have got over quite easily along there, but most of the time it's just going up on two wheels and staying there. Up next, we move on to the Escort. So the Gasser was done completely stock. The Escort, also completely stock. This, I guess, a Gymkhana car designed kind of for stunts and so on. I was expecting this to be a bit more tricky, but I was expecting this to be a bit more of a pain. You know, it's not got massively raised up suspension like that Bel Air. However, first attempt at the corner, and over goes the Escort. Now, I guess a combination of relatively stiff suspension from standard, relatively grippy tyres from standard, is enough for this car that it will just tumble over. Because of all the vehicles that I have driven in this series so far, this is perhaps the most surprising at an immediate roll, and very, very easy to get it to roll over. It's a big tumble from the Escort going back the other way. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that at all from the Ford. Having said all of that, it also didn't particularly like being fired over the faster curb. There was no real hint that it would ever even go over firing at the faster curb here, which is, again, quite strange to roll so very, very easily, and then to not really be interested over this particular direction is unusual from a car, to say the least. I guess bounced around a little bit on the exit curbs over there, but yeah, either way, from standard, no issues whatsoever rolling the Escort. And yeah, that is a fair surprise. I suspect stiff suspension helping a fair bit in all of that. We move on to another drag car, a more conventional drag car, the Napalm Nova. Another vehicle, much like with the Gasser, I was expecting to have potential difficulty, and more so, it's not, you know, got as high a centre of mass as the Bel Air. Okay, no, it's not as low as a full-on supercar or GT race car and so on, but we don't have that huge centre of mass I say advantage, but when it comes to rolling cars, advantage. Again, it does have a roll cage in it, which will help stiffen up the chassis. I didn't really know what the suspension would do. I expected it to be relatively soft. However, on the first attempt, it's enough for the Nova to go over as well. That one also quite a confusing one, but you can see the tyres clearly not on slick tyres or drag tyres, it's whatever the car comes with from standard. Gives it more than enough grip to go over, and this is relatively softly sprung, this car. You can see it bouncing around a little bit more. You don't see that with the Escort. This, I'm very surprised. In another attempt is actually a very vicious rollover from the car. The first one was quite a sort of a long, slow burn of a tumble, but that one was very much straight over. Fire it back in the other direction, and it's going to go over again. I don't know what it lost. I think it might be an exhaust that flung off the side. It's, yeah, quite broken now. I did have a couple of attempts as well, taking the faster approach with the Nova, and there, no problem either. This rolls easier than the Gasser does, and I have no idea why that is. I have absolutely no idea why the Nova is keener to fall over than the Gasser. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me, but I guess whatever the way this car is set up, it really falls over. I mean, it falls over very, very spectacularly as well. A large number of flips in all of that. So, yeah, so far, 3 cars down, 3 rolling very, very easily. Up next, the Twerk Stallion, the drifting Mazda RX-7. Now, again, I wasn't expecting this to be rolling standard, but then neither was I expecting the Escort 2 or the Nova for that matter. Of course, this will have relatively stiff suspension, and it will potentially have more camber than normal, which will help in terms of rolling. But we've got to be able to get the car up onto its side in the first place, and that was the important question. First attempt with the Mazda, and not quite so much. It got up onto its side slightly. This is more what I was expecting to see from a large number of these cars. In fact, for it to, it shows hints at being able to roll. You know, it is clearly getting up on its side for a little while, but nowhere near as far as we had, of course, seen from the previous vehicles. Now, it's not like we have seen with some of the race cars, where they'll get up onto their side and then immediately slam back down because, you know, the splitter hits the floor or whatever. This does hold itself on its side a little bit longer, which was giving me a relative amount of confidence that there would be possibilities for rolling this car. From standard, I tried a few different methods. In fact, oddly, with this one, when I threw it at sort of speed at the curb, it was very tame. It didn't really want to launch itself that far onto its side at all, while, you know, not rolling when we launched them at the curb in that manner. It's not usual to see a car kind of hug the ground as such. It does also kind of bounce weirdly over some of the exit curbs. Weird angle. I took the corner kind of going to set up for a run, and it kind of bobbled onto its side. Either way, it was going to have to be off to the upgrade shop with this one. Race tyres fitted, maximum tyre widths on the vehicle as well. Tinkered around with the suspension, raised it as much as we could, stiffened suspension, and maxed out the camber. First attempt with the changed RX-7, and it's kind of a cartwheel. Eventually makes it onto its roof, and that will be a roll for the Twerk Stallion. Fairly straightforward in the end with this one. Fairly straightforward to get it going over. I then, having successfully rolled it immediately, tried throwing it at the curb with a bit more speed. Still wasn't very interested in that one. That route was not working at all for the Mazda. I haven't quite figured out why sometimes cars like this faster route, sometimes they are not so keen on this. Yeah, I knew I could roll it over the slower, the more precise angle, so I was trying a couple of different things. We kind of bounce it around a little bit on the landings, but it's not going to be enough to tumble over, so back to throwing it at the curb normally, and things would still go wrong. It wasn't a surefire, it wasn't a guaranteed vehicle to roll. I think not helped by the steering. Very difficult to be precise with this car to an extent. There's quite a bit of understeer, and being a drift car, you can get things a little bit wrong and a little bit sideways, and if the car's sliding around, that is definitely not going to be a falling over. But yeah, while it wasn't every single time, certainly you could roll the Twerk Stallion. Move on to the Ute up next. Again, as far as expectation-wise goes for this, I was expecting this to be easier than the Twerk Stallion. That was my thoughts, but we've been seeing weird results from all of these cars so far. And I think perhaps the weird results are because the vehicles are kind of pre-modified in various ways, and that might be throwing up some interesting combinations. And at the end of the day, let's face it, we're just trying to break physics here. We're trying to break game physics here with modified crazy cars. So we were getting some interesting outcomes. The Ute has a problem, and it's a problem we've come across before, but it's strange that it's happening with the Ute because it hits the front of the car on the floor. It's very... yeah, very odd. We've seen it with race cars. We've seen it with the first cars that went, the McLaren GT3 car, the Lamborghini Centenario, that they'd get up onto their side, something would clonk, and then it would slam it back down again. And it was doing a very similar thing with this, and I can't for the life of me figure out why, because, while, okay, it's not exactly the highest riding of cars, it's not got a splitter that's scraping the floor. It would do it even like on approach, like the actual initial hit on the curb, because normally you have the hit on the curb to get it up onto its side, and then it scrapes along the floor. Sometimes I'd hit the curb and it would clonk the front on the curb itself, which was very peculiar. Again, throwing up weird things that I haven't really seen from cars before. With that being a bit of a pain, again, I tried the faster route. My hope was that this would be better for whatever was at the front of the car causing issues, but it wasn't really having any of that. So, upgrade time for the Holden race tyres, stiffer suspension, race suspension, and so on. Now, initially I did a couple of runs having not changed the rebound stiffness and that kind of thing, and it did the same thing of clonking the curb and getting very unhappy. When I went back, this was having gone back, I stiffened up all of the rebound stiffness and so on, and then it wasn't having the same effect. It was so something a little bit weird, a little bit strange with the suspension in this car causes it to have issues on the curb when it's all stiffened up massively. And I don't know why stiffening it up would be the cure for it, but when it is done, then it will go over fairly spectacularly, fairly straightforward. It's quite an impressive vehicle to have going over. It doesn't quite tumble as well as the Napalm Nova, I will be honest. It does also like to scrape along the floor on its side. That's the slight downside of this curb. Because we can't hit it with a huge amount of speed, you need to be quite slow to be very precise on it. You do often end up getting cars, because they're not going very fast, just scraping along the floor. But either way, the Ute had gone over. The final vehicle from this lot to, well, be tried and rolled was the Hoonicorn itself. Now, standard-wise, I wasn't holding out a huge amount of hope for this one. While, yes, it is going to have relatively stiff suspension, plenty of grip, it's also very, very low to the ground. I mean, it's designed for gymkhanaing, not exactly designed for rolling, but again, all sorts of weirdness had been going on. There was plenty of noise and plenty of fire as we set off on this first attempt. The biggest problem of all with this car was actually trying to hit the damn curb. The problem is the Hoonicorn has got so much power, and being all-wheel drive, quite a large amount of understeer, that aiming for that very tiny bit of curb that you need to hit to get cars up onto their side here was rather difficult. The first few runs I kind of lightly brushed the curb but not really hit the position that I need. I thought I'd try going backwards. That funnily enough didn't work either for the Hoonicorn. Yeah, it's such a huge amount of speed in this car that the tiniest sort of blip on the throttle and you'll suddenly end up quite a long way out of place. You kind of understeer your way a long way out of where you want to be with the curb. So that was a different one to have to try and deal with. I wondered if hitting the high-speed curb would do the Hoonicorn some good. It got some impressive height, some impressive distance. And this is kind of why I was surprised by the Twerk Stallion not really doing anything, because, okay, it's not as fast accelerating as this car, but still hitting this curb will normally launch them a long way into the air, if not all the way onto their side, and the Twerk Stallion just had no interest. The Hoonicorn was happy to bounce around. It was happy enough to get a bit onto its side, but it was never really looking likely that it was going to go rolling over in standard guise, and that's kind of to be expected. I think that's about as far as I ever got it onto its side and on the slower approach, so yeah, not going to happen. Utterly lunatic of a car as well. I should point that one out. So, upgrade shop time. In fact, this doesn't come on race tyres as standard. It comes on sport tyres. So, race tyres fitted, suspension tweaked with. Hadn't had to go for tyre pressures on any of these vehicles as of yet. First run with the Ford, and looking a lot more promising. A lot more promising indeed. And it wasn't doing the whole slamming back down onto the ground thing. It has got a relatively low splitter at the front, but that wasn't proving problematic. Second attempt, and it's more than enough to go over. A little bit of speed certainly helps matters when it comes to the spectacular tumbles, and yeah, it will go over without too much problem. Down there, I tried chucking it at high speed across the curves. It almost bounces its way across one of the secondary curves, actually fires it a long way onto its side, which is... I mean, we have kind of seen secondary curbs cause issues around there. Physics get really grumpy with some of the cars when I throw them at silly angles. That was quite an impressive amount onto two wheels. Yeah, didn't really want to go over. We kind of almost launched it a very weird way across that... very outside curb. We launched a couple of cars into rolls across that, but the Hoonicorn was not quite having any of that, but was doing weird things. I tried a completely new angle for the Mustang. Got surprisingly close, actually, to rolling over. I mean, the understeer from this car in general doesn't massively help it, because what I'm finding is getting the cars to roll. I tend to have the car turned in and then put your foot down at the last second, and when you do that with this, you put your foot down and you tend to get understeer out a little bit wide. So you've got to be mindful of when you go to the throttle with the vehicle, but get it right. And even this will go for a roll. So there we go. A selection of the Hoonigan cars, and all of them tumbling over fairly easily. Some of them doing very, very strange things and rolling in ways and places that we perhaps would never expect, but they very much will roll. That, though, is going to be it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.